Good afternoon. The Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States will now come to order. Before we begin, I do want to express my profound condolences to the family and co-workers of Alexander Lofgren. I know it must be heartbreaking to have that loss, and so for Chairman and those staff who have worked with him,
Thank you.
My blessings go out to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on H.R. 1884, the Save Oak Flat Act, introduced by Representative Raul M. Grijalva of Arizona. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. Hearing no objection, so ordered. As described in the hearing notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Additionally, please note that, as with in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. As within our in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. I also ask unanimous consent that Representative Stauber from Minnesota be allowed to join us on the virtual days today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I will begin by recognizing myself for my opening statement. I want to welcome our witnesses to our virtual hearing today. This legislative hearing will be on H.R. 1884, the Save Oak Flat Act, a bill that will prohibit the Oak Flat federal parcel transfer to foreign mining corporations. The 2,422-acre parcel includes the Chichilbilda-Gotel Historic District, known as Oak Flat, located in the Tonto National Forest. This area is considered sacred by many tribal nations, including the San Carlos Apache tribe, the Tonto Apache tribe, the White Mountain Apache tribe, the Yavapai Apache Nation, the Yavapai Prescott Indian tribe, the Gila River Indian Community, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, the Hopi tribe, and the Pueblo of Zuni, many of whom continue to conduct ceremonies and gather traditional medicines and food in the area. The National Park Service has recognized this land's sacred status by listing Oak Flat on the National Register of Historic Places in 2016. You may be wondering why land listed on the National Register of Historic Places is ripe for mining. In 2014, a rider on the National Defense Authorization Act authorized a land exchange giving Oak Flat to a multinational mining conglomerate called Resolution Copper, owned by Rio Tinto and BHP. The NDAA language required the Forest Service to produce an EIS to evaluate the mining plan's effects before the exchange occurred. The NDAA language also stipulated the land should be removed from the Forest Service jurisdiction and placed into the hands of Resolution Copper within 60 days after completing the EIS, regardless of the findings. A little over a year ago, in the 116th Congress, this subcommittee held an oversight hearing examining the draft EIS published by the Trump administration. The draft EIS identified the tribal, soil, water, wildlife, recreation, public health, and livestock impacts mining would have on this area. Analysis showed that ancestral burial grounds for the Native communities in the region will also inevitably be disturbed and destroyed. The crater expected to be created is projected to start to appear in year 6 of active mining and will ultimately be between 800 and 1,100 feet deep and roughly 1.8 miles across. The emery oak groves, which have been visited and utilized by tribal members for millennia, will be adversely affected, and one or more of those groves will likely be lost altogether. Well-filled pumping will also incrementally contribute to the lowering of groundwater levels and cumulatively reduce overall groundwater availability in the local area. Although the draft EIS process to the final environmental impact statement usually takes time, on January 15th, the previous administration released a final FEIS, which was released without proper consultation with tribes and did not address the myriad concerns identified in the draft EIS. In March 2021, the Biden administration withdrew the FEIS to further consult with tribes and thoroughly conduct an environmental impact statement that fully complies with the law. Since 2015, Chair Grijalva has introduced the Save Oak Flat Act to protect the Chilchilbilda-Gotel Historic District from detrimental mining. This bill will repeal Section 3003 of the NDAA and protect the sacred site for future generations. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today virtually. I look forward to hearing your testimony. And I would like to now recognize the esteemed ranking member, Mr. Young, for any opening remarks. Mr. Young, Congressman Young? Congressman Young, go ahead. Oh, Congressman Young is having technical issues. Is Mr. Westerman with us today? In the meantime, we can, when Congressman Young is able to participate, I will make sure I go back to him. And in the meantime, I would like to give any sponsoring members of Congress the opportunity to speak on behalf of the legislation. The chair now recognizes the chair of the full committee, Chair Grijalva, for a statement on his legislation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I appreciate you having this hearing on the legislation, HR 1884. I think your summation in your opening statement basically deals with the issue. And rather than being repetitive, let me point out a couple of other issues. I think it's important to note that, yes, it passed on a must-pass piece of legislation, the section 3003 of the National Defense Authorization Act in 2015. It was a must-pass piece of legislation, and as such, passed the House, passed the Senate, and was signed into law. It should be noted that since 2005, this particular section, 3003, in other iterations of standalone legislation, repeatedly failed to receive support in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate as a standalone piece of legislation. And when it was, and since 2015, I've been introducing the Save Oak Flat Act to uphold what I believe is essential: Indigenous peoples' rights to protect the lands and these lands, and many tribes in Arizona and outside of Arizona consider sacred. As the chair indicated, the historic site known as Oak Flat has deep significance. It was placed in the National Register in 2016, and that with extensive consultation with the San Carlos Apache tribe. This area has been utilized and occupied for the past 1,500 years, from the pre-classic Hohokam to the present. Resolution Copper is owned by a multinational corporation, Rio Tinto and BHP, and plans on developing and extracting this sacred ecosystem for profits that will only last a lifetime, destroying what we already know is a profoundly religious sacred site for generations and generations. Unfortunately, the track record of Rio Tinto, and some of the witnesses will deal with that, in unearthing sacred sites is not new. Just last year, the foreign mining giant blew up a 46,000-year-old Aborigine cave in Australia, and the difference between the two is that members of this subcommittee have the opportunity to right that wrong and not allow that to happen. We have a chance to protect the site that many tribes use for spiritual and traditional purposes. the environmental damage resolution copper can have on the area impacts tribes in Arizona and the water resources to communities. Let me just say, there's two issues also as well. The issue of water. The drought in Arizona and in other parts of the Southwest is ongoing and is not abating. The depletion of the Colorado River, the 40% reduction in Lake Mead and Lake Powell in terms of the reservoirs that the Grand Canyon provides for Arizona and other states, and over 40 million Americans in those areas, is an emergency setting. And emergency water reduction and allocations are imminent if we don't take better care, usage, and protection of that water resource. The other issue is the royalty issue. Mining extraction provides no royalties for the extraction of private land. And this trade, this land exchange, under normal circumstances would have required a process, not only NEPA, but full environmental impact, consultation as required by law, government to government consultations with affected tribes, and none of that has occurred to the degree where the tribes and other youth and others who want this area protected feel that this process has been fair, upfront, and transparent and accountable. This is a sweetheart deal, and it has been a sweetheart deal since it was first introduced as legislation in 2005, and it continues to be a sweetheart deal for the company as of 2015 when it passed as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. I look forward to the witnesses, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for holding the hearing. And as this legislation moves along, I want to invite you and other members to have input into the legislation as to both content and any recommendations that you might have. With that, let me yield back and thank you once again, Madam Chair, for your courtesy. And
Thank you.
let me say, the loss of our esteemed colleague here, Alex Lawford, thank you for mentioning that. It's a tragedy and a very sad experience for all of us that knew the young man, and those people that did not know him, a loss for them as well. And so thank you for mentioning that, and that was very kind of you, and I appreciate the courtesy.
Thank you. And once again, our condolences, blessings, and prayers for Mr. Lockman and his family. Now, I would like to recognize our ranking member, Congressman Young. I understand he is available. Congressman Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, the chairman of the full committee, for the comments. And I agree with what he said about his staffer. It's unfortunate. When you adventure, sometimes accidents happen, and it's sad when it does occur. I've been involved in this legislation for a long time. I know there's been some progress made. I will not repeat everything you said or the chairman have said. I would suggest that we listen to the witnesses and we look and see, is there a way to make this possible as it should be done, as I call the rules. And so I'm anxious to listen to the witnesses, find out what they have to say. And I will say that I am a little frustrated when everybody says no to everything. But there is some legitimacy in the complaints, as the chairman said, about this being a sacred area. So let's listen to the witness, let's go through as the legislation goes by. Let's see if there isn't a way we can arrive at a solution to a very serious problem. Because there is a law in place. We did pass that law. It wasn't done by due order, but it was also done. And when you repeal a law, we have to look at the process in which you do it. And I know there will be some legal cases if we don't. So let's do the job right, Madam Chair. I'm sure we will. And when you get time, I need to talk to you personally on another bill, which I hope I have your support of introducing. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Young, and I always look forward to speaking with you. Congressman Westerman, do you have would you like to speak to the committee today? I'm not hearing from Congressman Westerman, so I understood he was on, but we will now move to the witnesses. So under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. When you begin, the on-screen timer will begin counting down. It will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I recommend that members and witnesses joining remotely lock the timer on their screen. When you go over the allotted time, I'll ask you to please wrap up your statement. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I will allow the entire panel to testify before we question witnesses. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Sean Lewis, the President of the Intertribal Association of Arizona.
Good afternoon, Chairman Grijalva, Chairperson Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, Vice Ranking Member Obernolt, Representative Gallegos, and member of the subcommittee. My name is Shan Lewis. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Fort Mojave Indian Tribe and President of the Intertribal Association of Arizona. On behalf of our 21 member tribes, we appreciate this opportunity to speak today in support of the Save Oak Flat Act. The survival of Oak Flat is at a critical moment. Passage of the Save Oak Flat bill would respect the religious and cultural practices and values of our member tribes and protect the water resources of Arizona. We urge that you act now and save Oak Flat for all of us and for future generations. Oak Flat is located in the Tonto National Forest. It's a place of profound religious, cultural, and historic significance to Western Apache and Yavapai people, as well as many other tribes in the region. Is a place for prayer, for ceremonies like the sunrise ceremony, a coming of age ceremony for young women, and for gathering water and medicine plants and important foods like acorns that are abundant in this area due to the ancient oak trees that shelter Oak Flat. Oak Flat has been a sacred place since time immemorial. It is culturally significant to many tribes. The recent work of anthropologist T.J. Ferguson, done in cooperation with the Forest Service, also confirms Oak Flat's importance to at least 9 Arizona tribes. It's our understanding that Dr. Ferguson has submitted testimony for today's hearing, and we urge you to review it. In recognition of Oak Flat's importance, Oak Flat is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Yet if Congress doesn't act, over 2,400 acres of tribal ancestral lands at Oak Flat will be traded away for one of the most destructive mines we have ever seen, destroying in turn the religious freedoms and cultural practices of many of our member tribes. It is for this reason the Intertribal Association of Arizona has opposed this land exchange and mine from the beginning. If developed, the Forest Service own documents say the mine will cause a massive crater at the heart of Oak Flat, which will almost 2 miles wide and at least 1,000 feet deep as the Empire State Building is tall. The ancient oak trees that have provided subsistence to tribal people for generations will be destroyed by this mine, along with the surrounding medicinal plants that have provided the health of indigenous people for centuries. These oak trees and these plants cannot be replaced, and there is no mitigation that will reduce the harm caused by the destruction of Oak Flat. Arizona tribes remain in control of approximately 28% of the state, and while we have endured many challenges in maintaining control over our land, our sacred sites, and our status as sovereign nations, we know water is the most important life-giving resource of all. Forest Service documents say the mine will use billions of gallons of water, both from the mine site at Oak Flat and from well field just outside of Phoenix. If allowed to move forward, the mine at Oak Flat will destroy countless springs and water resources. Once gone, there will be no mitigation for this loss. Almost every part of Arizona is under extreme or extraordinary drought, and we are hearing news of impending shortages on the Colorado River. At the same time, people are moving here in record numbers. Yet this single mine project would deplete massive amounts of water from Arizona's water supply. How can all of this fit in Arizona's long-term water future? The answer is it can't. Perhaps the mine could bring a handful of short-term jobs to the area, but at what cost? As tribal leaders, we must think about future generations, and the negative impact the mine would have over the long term. The United States also should not violate its trust responsibility and constitutional obligations by trading away Oak Flat and the religious freedoms of Indigenous people. Without action, Oak Flat will be traded away and destroyed after the Forest Service reissues the final EIS, which we expect sometime this year. As elected leaders of our tribal nations, it is our responsibility to protect sacred sites. And so respectfully, we urge Congress to pass the Save Oak Flat Act. Thank you again for this opportunity to provide testimony. I would be glad to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, President Lewis. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Fawn Sharp, President of the National Congress of American Indians.
Yohuch, Anjak Hawishka. Good afternoon. My name is Fawn Sharp. I serve as president of the National Congress of American Indians. Founded in 1944, NCAI is the oldest, largest, and most representative organization comprised of tribal nations and their citizens. Chair Leger Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the National Congress of American Indians, we thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony on a critically important issue.
Excuse me, if we could hold the timer just a bit. You're not coming very clear on my computer, so maybe, maybe getting it a little closer so we can all hear you well.
Can you hear me okay now?
That's better, thank you.
Okay.
That's better, go on.
I'm a case in point for the need of broadband in Indian country. Today, my testimony addresses Congress's fiduciary obligations to protect tribal resources, the documented historical and cultural resources within the Oak Flat area, and highlights the longstanding national opposition to this land transfer. Tribal nations have a unique legal and political relationship with the United States that is defined in the United States Constitution, treaties, statutes, court decisions, and executive orders. Through its acquisition of tribal lands, the United States has formed a trust relationship with tribal nations. Part of this trust obligation is to safeguard tribal rights, lands, resources, cultural practices, and sacred sites. For example, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act states, quote, "It shall be the policy of the United States to protect and preserve for American Indians their inherent right of freedom to believe, express, exercise traditional religions, including but not limited to access to sacred sites." Similarly, the National Historic Preservation Act states that it is the policy of the federal government, in cooperation with other nations and in partnership with Indian tribes, to provide leadership in the preservation of the prehistoric and historic resources of the United States. And Article 8 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was endorsed by the United States in 2010, protects the right of tribal nations from being subject to forced destruction of their cultural, and specifically requires state parties to provide mechanisms for preservation and redress. As part of its trust responsibility and trust relationship, the federal government has recognized the historic and cultural uniqueness of Oak Flat. Beginning with President Eisenhower in 1955, the federal government has recognized the importance of Oak Flat and protected it from mining activities. More recently, in 2016, Oak Flat was placed on the National Register of Historic Places as a traditional cultural property. The United States also has obligations under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Among other enumerated rights, protecting Indigenous cultural expressions. Article 8 protects the right of tribal nations not to be subject to forced destruction of their culture, and specifically requires state parties to provide mechanisms for the prevention and redress. Here, tribal nations have been provided no avenues to prevent the destruction of an irreplaceable sacred site. The proposed transfer of Oak Flat would set a dangerous precedent and violate international law and the federal trust responsibility, to which the United States has charged itself with moral obligations of the highest responsibility. Lastly, there is a long-standing opposition to the destruction of Oak Flat from Indian country and Congress. Since 2009, NCEI has passed 7 resolutions specifically opposing legislation that would transfer the Oak Flat area to Resolution Copper. More recently, Resolution number ABQ 19062 expressed support for repeal of Section 3003 of the 2015 NDAA due to its circumvention of federal laws that protect tribal sacred places from destruction and harm. Both the House and the Senate have previously rejected the destruction of the sacred site. Since 2005, there have been 13 failed attempts to pass legislation that would transfer the Oak Flat area to Resolution Copper. Only the late rider to a must-pass piece of legislation succeeded. I also want to draw your attention to the fact that while tribal nations all across this country have relinquished millions of acres of vast and pristine lands across this country, we have never relinquished our spiritual connection to these very sacred places. And the younger generations that are coming up who would go to Oak Flat for coming of age ceremonies, for songs, for dance, for prayer, they too are exercising a right that tribal nations have exercised for millennia, and we urge support, and we thank you for holding this hearing on H.R. 1884, a bill that would address an extraordinary threat to the religious practices of American Indians and tribal environmental, historic, and cultural resources. With that, NCAI urges passage of H.R. 1884 because the land transfer of Oak Flat violates the federal trust responsibility. Siakwel.
Thank you, President Sean. The chair now recognizes Dr. James Wells, the Chief Operating Officer at Al Everett and Associates.
Thank you for inviting me to testify today on H.R. 1884, the Save Oak Flat Act. My name is Jim Wells. I have been a practicing environmental geologist for more than 30 years. For the last 7 years, I have advised the San Carlos Apache tribe on environmental and water resource matters. And at the invitation of the Forest Service, I served on the groundwater working groups, advising Tonto National Forest on the draft and final EISs for the Resolution Copper Mine, which is a joint venture of foreign mining giants Rio Tinto and BHP. I urge Congress to pass this bill because of the devastating and irreparable cultural and environmental impacts that would ensue if this mine were developed. I'm not anti-mining. I have worked as a mineral exploration geologist. We need copper and other metals. However, we do not need to greenlight every mining project if the cultural and environmental costs are too high, as they are for this project. This mine will consume enough water to supply a city of 140,000 people every year for 50 years. This represents a massive new water demand in a region already experiencing water shortage. The final EIS says this mine will use at least 250 billion gallons of water. That's a lot of water. To provide a visual, this mine would need a tank the size of a football field, 147 miles high, to hold all that water. Most of this water will be pumped from the East Salt River Valley. The proposed well field is in the Phoenix Active Management Area, or AMA, and is just north of the Pinal AMA, where there is already an 8.1 million acre foot groundwater shortfall. Tens of thousands of people in Pinal County rely on groundwater for their water supplies, and already wells are drying up. There's really just not enough groundwater to go around in this part of Arizona. EIS computer modeling acknowledged that cumulative effects of resolutions pumping, along with other known demands, will drop groundwater levels about 450 feet. This outcome is contrary to Arizona's long-stated goal to achieve safe yield in this groundwater basin and avoid depleting the aquifer. There's no serious analysis in the EIS of mitigation measures for the impact on the state's water resources. The EIS claims that Resolution's water use adheres to Arizona's norms and values, but depleting groundwater aquifers is the exact opposite of Arizona's values. Even the Arizona State Land Department objected that Resolution's groundwater withdrawals would cause a loss of development potential for more than 3,000 acres of state trust land in the Superstition Vistas planning area for a loss of $536 million. After Resolution takes all the groundwater it needs, there's simply less water for other users. Now, Resolution chooses to employ block cave mining because that's the cheapest way to mine this deep, low-grade ore body, causing a 1.8 mile wide crater 1,000 feet deep. The copper is 7,000 feet below Oak Flat, but Resolution would destroy Oak Flat anyway. The EIS acknowledges that sacred perennial springs will be eradicated, and at least 18 different groundwater-dependent ecosystems will be impacted. So in summary, this mine would have profound and irreversible impacts on the citizens of Arizona and the environment.
So he's gone.
For these reasons, I urge the committee to advance the Save Oak Flat Act to stop this mine from going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wells. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Mila Besich, the mayor of the town of Superior.
Good afternoon, Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Westerman, Subcommittee Chair Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and members of the committee. I am Mila Besich, Mayor of the town of Superior, a small community located 60 miles east of Phoenix, Arizona, and the closest community next to the Resolution Copper Project. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today to tell you about my town and its history. Superior is a close-knit community with a long and rich history in mining that dates back to 1875. The town evolved as a center for commerce, serving the mining industry throughout Arizona. H.R. 1884, if passed, will be devastating for my community. The population of Superior is just over 3,000 residents and has grown by 8% since 2010. About 40% of the residents have lived in the town for more than 20 years, and there are a number of multi-generational families. The median age of residents is 45.4 years old, which is well above the state and national median age. We need to create job and business opportunities for our youth and working adults so that our community remains viable for generations to come. Many of the employed residents of Superior commute to jobs in Phoenix or other parts of the East Valley. Only about 15% of residents work in the local community because our business space and areas for business and commercial opportunities are land limited. Superior is located at the base of Apache Leap Mountain and is surrounded by the Tonto National Forest, which is the 5th largest national forest, and we are in the Globe Ranger District on the Tonto, which is one of the most mined districts in the lower 48 states. The area surrounding Superior offers a diversity of climate zones, from desert vistas to mountainous areas with snow and waterfalls. This stunning natural landscape creates the perfect setting for world-class outdoor recreation. The combination of scenery, rich cultural experiences, and gastronomy make for our community to be lively and diverse. My family has been in this area for 5 generations. Many of my friends and neighbors in Superior have roots tracing back 7 or 8 generations. When I graduated from Superior High School in the 90s, opportunities were limited, and in fact, my formative years did not include any hint of bright days of a mining boom. As a community, we truly understand the booms, busts, and risks associated with mining. We have also learned how critically important it is to participate in these important permitting processes and follow up on all environmental regulations. Mining will always be part of our economic DNA. The Resolution Copper Project presented a unique opportunity to help us build Superior's future and develop a diversified economy. We are a town with a mine. This includes working with the mining industry and government officials to ensure that an operational copper mine is a net positive for Superior, our region, and our state. Superior remained at the table and actively participated in the FEIS process. To start over would be counter to the best interests of the people of Superior. We strongly support the rights of our Apache neighbors, that their voices be heard. But what has been overlooked in recent media reports is that through the entire EIS process, the Forest Service and interested parties have worked and consulted with the tribes. The EIS process was long and laborious, but it achieved exactly what it was intended. An intense process that has taken all of the stakeholders' concerns and melded it into one document to address these diverse and divergent issues. Superior needs jobs and private capital investment so we can continue to thrive. And while this may be an unintended consequence, it is real. HR 1884 will repeal the land exchange that was enacted by Congress in December 2014. The land exchange is mission critical to Superior's ability to attract housing and economic development opportunities. Enactment of HR 1884 will essentially deprive Superior of the ability to build a more diverse economy and prosperous future for our children, youth, and families. Chairman Grijalva, you have been a champion for Arizona, and your long tenure and honorable service to our great state are respected and appreciated. However, our town's future is highly dependent on this mine opening. Therefore, we reluctantly oppose your bill and ask that Secretary Vilsack approve the FEIS in a timely fashion so we can get our project back on track. Protect Superior in the Copper Corridor region. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I would like to invite you to visit Superior in the Copper Corridor. I am happy to address any comments or questions you or your members of the committee might have.
Thank you so much, Mayor Besich, for your witness testimony. We will now turn to questions from our members. We'll begin with Chairman Grijalva.
The Oak Flat transfer. And more importantly, if tribal consultation had been codified at the time of Section 3003's insertion into the NDEA in 2015, could this land transfer have been prevented? And the other thing is, you briefly mentioned traditional cultural properties, and I'd really like you to elaborate on those and explain their importance. And thank you, Madam President.
Chairman Grijalva, is that question directed to President Sharp? You were cut off at the beginning, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. Thank you. Would you like me to repeat that?
Yes, please. I couldn't hear the beginning of the question. Thank you.
If the issue of tribal consultation, the role that it would have played if in the creation of legislation that mandated this land transfer at Oak Flat, and if tribal consultation was codified at the time of this section was inserted into the 2015 National Defense Act, could the land transfer been prevented? And then I think the point that you mentioned about traditional cultural properties, just to elaborate on that and explain their importance. With that, I turn it over to you, and sorry about the glitch there.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I really appreciate that question. The issue of consultation for tribal nations is one that ensures that we have political equality with another sovereign, with our trustee, the United States. When we don't have consultation, we're vulnerable to another sovereign taking unilateral action against our land, territories, and resources, not only without hearing our voice, but we think that we need to have consent in those relationships. None of that was accomplished here. And what it meant was this bill was passed without the knowledge, the wisdom, the timeless honored traditions of the San Carlos Apache people, and was done unilaterally. And so the legislation itself was entirely void of any of that connection with the San Carlos Apache people. And so, and to your point about tribal traditional cultural properties, that too is an important point to mention, that not only is it important to recognize those areas where there's a geographical footprint, but there are traditions and there are connections to sacred sites and lands that can only be understood by consulting with tribal nations and hearing from our perspective. These are things that you cannot find on the internet, study in a book, or any other environmental study. So it's absolutely important that we be directly engaged and consulted with. And I appreciate the question. Siakweo.
Thank you. Dr. Wells, if I may, thank you, Madam Chair. Your testimony mentions that you're part of a groundwater modeling work group for environmental review process. From your participation in this process, do you believe the citizens of nearby communities in Pinal County and others in the state should be concerned about the water scarcity if Resolution Copper moves forward? And if so, why?
Thank you, Chairman, for that question. The answer is unreservedly yes. The nearby communities need to be concerned about water scarcity, frankly, even without resolution, and this only makes it worse. Another thing to keep in mind is the other major source of water for the state is the CAP, or the Central Arizona Project, which brings in water from the Colorado River. And as a member mentioned earlier, if the water levels in Lake Powell decline to a certain level, there will be automatic restrictions, which would result in very large reductions in Arizona's delivery of Colorado River water. And according to the Bureau of Reclamation's most recent estimates, there's almost a 50% chance of that happening just in the next 2, 3, or 4 years.
Thank you. And President Lewis, it's good to see you. Can you talk about what it would mean? Well, let me go to the point that you made in your written testimony. You mentioned Rio Tinto's actions that destroyed indigenous rock shelters in Australia, and I mentioned it as well. What has Rio Tinto's response been to that devastation at the gorge, and how does that parallel with Oak Flat?
We'll do it never. Chairman Grijalva, given the technical difficulties, I'll allow an extra 30 seconds for this. President Lewis? Yeah, they're going to do it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just the destruction of, like in the testimony, the destruction of sacred sites, obviously they're irreplaceable. And I think that's what the main concern is for tribes, is once these sacred sites are lost, they cannot be brought back, they cannot be mitigated, they cannot be replaced. So I think that's what we got the most out of looking at that other sacred site issue that happened over there, is that it's irreplaceable. And as we know, tribes are limited in their sacred sites. And
how much time do I have? I don't have the clock with me.
That's what I feel about that.
Thank you very much.
You're back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Grijalva. The ranking member Westerman is now with us and has asked that he be allowed to give his opening statement at this time, and I will recognize ranking member Westerman for his opening statement, and then he would actually have, I will also then recognize him for to ask his questions at this time. Congressman Westerman, are you with us? If he is not here, I will now turn to Congressman Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the witnesses again. This is a very controversial issue, and I'm always interested in the conflict, but the mayor, Besich, I would like, how long did it take, or do you think the EPA now, NEPA analysis was rushed, or do you think it took some time?
This has been an incredibly long process for everyone involved. Since the land exchange was approved, we have been in a permitting process for probably a decade at least, going through developing the draft EIS and coming to the final EIS that was released in January.
Okay, do you think the Forest Service did an adequate job?
They did a more than adequate job. They were very thorough and provided all of the partners opportunities to consult and interact with them and the process.
Has Rio Tinto been asked about, instead of the cliff type mining, about the possibility under surface mining? Has that been discussed at all in this consultation?
I believe that Rio Tinto has suggested how they are planning on mining this ore body, but I am not aware of any other further consultations with the Forest Service and Rio Tinto.
Okay, because that's one thing that interests me. I understand the religious concept and the sacred ground, but I would wonder if there'd be opposition, in fact, if it was underground mining, because this ore is quite deep, the way I understand it. And that's something we may consider. I'm open-minded on this. I was part of this program. I've gone through every hearing on it, and I want to listen to the author of the bill. But if there's a way to, because we keep talking about, I talked with the president yesterday, modern technology, and it all includes copper. And I just as soon make sure we do it safely here if we can, than buying it from Australia or some other country. So I think we all ought to take that all into consideration. And Madam Chair, with that, I'm going to yield back. And I have another appointment. I do, and say I'm sorry for Chairman Westerman or the ranking member. I don't know where he is. This Zoom stuff drives me crazy. But thank you, Madam Mayor. I was a mayor, hardest job I ever had, so I don't envy you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Congressman Young. The chair will now recognize Congressman Gallego for 5 minutes.
Excellent. Can you hear me? Thank you. My first question is for Mr. Wells. You, I think, describe what happens in case we have to go through the drought contingency where we fall below certain levels, which means that people will have to stop using water, farmers, some municipalities. Would the mine be exempt from that situation? Let's say that if the state has to go through some type of drought contingency.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm just a geologist and not a lawyer, but I'll tell you what I think. I think the answer is the mine would be exempt from that because the drought contingency plan describes how water from the Colorado River would be allocated. And the mine would be pulling groundwater from the East Salt River Valley. So it's my understanding that yes, they would essentially be exempted from any water use reductions.
Okay. We should probably get something clarified on that. President Lewis, just back on water. In your testimony, you point out the estimate that the proposed mine will deplete at least 87,000 acre-feet of water in the Oak Flat area and pump more than 500,000 acre-feet of groundwater from central Arizona. So we know how this impacts, obviously, the valley where I am in central Phoenix, or South Phoenix, I should say. But how does this really impact tribal nations, which I think don't necessarily have as much of the water infrastructure that would be helpful when we're dealing with droughts?
Yes, Congressman. Well, as we know, water is life. Obviously, if water were to be depleted from a reservation, obviously it takes away the life of the reservation. So, you know, there's many tribes in Arizona. We're spread out. We have tribes on the Colorado River. We have tribes like San Carlos that are up in the mountains. We have desert tribes. So water is very important to tribes, obviously. And I think the protection of water, especially in Arizona, has been seen through the drought contingency plan of tribes being at the table with all of those different things that are going on with this, looking at this drought contingency plan in the future of what's going to happen. And I think that's what's most important to this with tribes is if they lose their water, obviously they lose their cultural resources, they lose things like that. So that's really what's important. Water is life.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Gallego. The chair would now recognize Mr. Obalnolte for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you very much for holding this hearing. I think this is an incredibly important topic because when we consider the wide variety of land that is held by the federal government and the competing demands on that land, I think Congress exercises a really unique responsibility to recognize those competing interests. On the one hand, we have here the tribal interests, the sacred lands, the concern about resources like water, and on the other hand, the desire to have strategic minerals mined here in the United States, the recognition that has to happen somewhere, and the jobs and the prosperity that's going to bring to a very rural region of the country. So I think this is very appropriate for us to be discussing this topic. I had a question for Mr. Lewis. So following up on the comments of Ranking Member Young, he was asking about whether or not there might be a compromise here, whether or not the areas of tribal significance could be avoided, whether or not different mining technologies could be used to extract that copper from which is from what's one of the richest deposits of copper in the world. So Mr. Lewis, is there some kind of like compromise here that would preserve the aspects of this land that you're concerned about and yet still allow the copper to be extracted?
Yeah, I think I can't fully answer that. I think San Carlos Apache could better answer that question. Obviously, with this type of mining, tribes aren't against mining, but with this type of mining and the destruction, potential destruction of the sacred sites and the depleting of water, I think that's more of a technical issue for San Carlos Apache to be able to answer as far as mitigation. But at the end of the day, this type of mining would destroy a sacred site. So I would probably refer that back to San Carlos Apache, who actually lives in the area.
Okay, so Mrs. Sharp, same question to you. Is there a half a loaf here that can satisfy the desire to get access to these minerals on federal land and yet still respect those tribal rights that I think we all very much appreciate?
I believe if the United States truly honored its trust and treaty obligations and understood what sacred sites and religious freedom meant to the rights of Indigenous peoples, it would be quite clear that the United States is not even in a position to even ask that question and make that calculus. If a tribal nation says, we have a sacred site, this is where we have an identity, the United States must honor that. It must honor the right of Indigenous peoples who've been practicing religious freedoms for millennia in a place that is not only essential to their spiritual health, but their very core of their identity. It is wrong to even ask that question to make a calculus. It would be like saying, if there was a copper mine discovered underneath the Vatican, would it be okay to desecrate the Vatican to access rich resources? I think the answer would be no.
So thank you. I think I agree. Is there a site of it? Ms. Sharp? Ms. Sharp?
Hello? You cut out at the beginning of that and I couldn't hear the question. You're buffering.
Okay, let me state it again. I think I understand the point that you're making. So forgive my ignorance here, though. Is the entire site a sacred site or just portions of it?
I couldn't answer that definitively. I know that there are sacred sites in that space. I've seen a map of it. It's quite a large footprint. And I would imagine that whole area, just like in our area here at Quinault, we have sacred sites in certain places, but there is a geographical area that represents our ancestral homelands, and accessing it and being able to not only practice in certain spaces, but the ability to access those, it entails a whole geographical area. And I just couldn't speak directly to that about how encompassing that is for the San Carlos Apache people to not only practice their religious freedoms, but to access it.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll yield back, but let me just say that, like the ranking member, I'm hopeful that maybe there's a compromise that can respect the rights that I think we all want to respect and still allow federal land to be used for a purpose that I think that benefits.
Mr. Obalnelty, you're
People.
buffering. Mr. Obalnelty, you buffered. I want to see if we can hear your statement. Can you hold on just a second? Because I would like to hear your statement, but you seem to be cutting out. Am I cutting out? Mr. Obalnelty, I'll give you time to repeat your statement because you did cut out, and I believe you were trying to make an important closing to your questioning. I'll give you time to do that right.
We're having mutual technical difficulties here, but just want to reiterate what the ranking member was talking about perhaps finding a compromise here that respected both tribal rights and the vested public interest in extracting a strategic mineral, from within the continental United States. From elsewhere. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I go back.
Thank you, Mr. Obalnelty. The chair will now recognize Congresswoman McCollum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to make an observation. We've talked a lot about, mining, but there's another way we can mine, and it's recycling. And we do know that people will go through abandoned buildings or homes that are left unoccupied, businesses to strip the copper out. So it's valuable, and we should be looking at doing more as a government for recycling these precious minerals and reusing and reducing the amount of disruption we do to our environment. Water's been discussed. Water has great value. As several people have pointed out, you can't live without the essence of water, yet we don't place a dollar value on it. And because it doesn't have a dollar value, it goes up against things that do have dollar values. So with that, Madam Chair, I do have something I would like to ask President Lewis. I want to thank you for your testimony on behalf of fellow tribal leaders in Arizona. You shared some very powerful words about the value of the sacred Oak Flat area to the Western Apache people. This was their land, and this still is your land. And I'd like to highlight one part of your testimony because I think it's incredibly important. When I served as a state legislator in Minnesota, I worked in the General Legislative Committee, and we dealt a lot with cemetery laws and places where there were burials and sacred sites and that. We did everything in our power to respect that. And so I bring that value and that ethic with me here. But sir, you stated in your testimony, and it was very moving, and I quote from it, "It would leave a stain on who we are as Americans, since we would be exchanging the religious freedoms of tribal people for a promise of jobs and profit offered by a foreign mining interest." And I couldn't agree with you more. But for those who might like some more education and understanding of tribal tradition and religion, could you maybe talk a little more about the precedent that this would be setting to exchange federal land that is currently protected, a known traditional cultural property, to a foreign, and I want to stress this, to a foreign mining company whose activities will destroy the sacred site? Mr. Lewis, could you tell us some more of what you would like us to know?
Thank you for those words. What I know about tribes in Arizona, there's 22 tribes in Arizona. Each one of them has its own beliefs. Each one of them has its own, sacred rituals, all the way down to, like you mentioned, burial rituals. So I don't want to speak for how another tribe does it, but every tribe has its own unique way of doing things. And what's important to know in this case is if something is lost, like a sacred site or a burial site, for instance, here in San Carlos, is once it's gone forever. There's no way of bringing it back, of mitigating it, or doing anything to right that wrong. And I think that's what's important here, and what we're trying to get across is once that's gone, you can't bring it back. And you know, as far as San Carlos is, you know, obviously being against the mine, you could probably, I wouldn't want to speak for them. I don't want to say exactly
I
what it means.
appreciate that. Well, thank you for
Yes.
that. I just want to refresh everybody. There was a great vocal opposition to this. The Southeast Land Exchange was pushed through, and a last-minute writer on the FY 2015 NDAA, a defense bill, without allowing a vote in the House or the Senate. So we've never had a clear vote on this. We've never been given that opportunity. And I remember the shock and anger I felt by the use of that tactic. It was outrageous. And I also remember rallying with you, Chairman Grijalva, as tribal leaders and Native youth came to our Capitol lawn that summer. And I said I would stand with them. So, Madam Chair, I'm so glad you're having this hearing today. And I thank you for the opportunity to ask a question.
You yield back. Thank you very much. The chair will now recognize Congressman Rosendale for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the hearing today. And Chair Grijalva, please accept my condolences for you and your staff. Thank you very much to the panel also, the entire panel, for joining us today. As you may know, Montana is a leader in copper production, with copper being the second most produced mineral in Montana. It accounts for a significant percentage of the state's GDP. In 2020, the United States saw a decrease in copper production by 5%, and the United States imported 50% of its non-fuel mineral commodities. I find these statistics deeply troubling as we enter an era marked by innovation and global competition for telecommunications, electronics, and renewable energy technologies. The United States is the safest, most environmentally friendly country for mineral production. We have regulations in place to ensure stringent environmental standards are met, and much greater protections for our workers than any place else. U.S. mineral import dependence and the concentration of mineral supply from certain countries is a growing threat to economic growth, competitiveness, and national security. All that being said, Mayor Besich, could you please talk about the community investments that have been made in anticipation of this project?
Thank you, Representative Rosendale. Resolution Copper has been making significant investments. Prior to the draft EIS coming out, we developed several agreements, one for education, where they fund our schools in a 5-year increment for $300,000. We have a multi-generational center agreement, which is helping us to recession-proof our community services, such as our senior center, library, and in addition to our multi-gen center, we will also add a entrepreneurial and innovation center, which will grow and help support future entrepreneurs and existing entrepreneurs in our community. They have also funded our Chamber of Commerce to help us with promoting Superior and helping our existing business community grow, and also Rebuild Superior, where we've been working on housing redevelopment and really making sure that Superior is ready to support this monolithic mining operation.
Excellent. Excellent. What impact would this legislation and the repeal of this land exchange have on your community?
We're very concerned if the land exchange is repealed because our opportunity for growth and economic diversification is tied to this land exchange. The town of Superior will be able to purchase 546 acres of federal Forest Service land so we can develop additional housing and commercial and business opportunities. If this land exchange is further delayed and or rescinded, we have to start at the drawing board. This has been an incredibly arduous process for the town of Superior to actively participate. So it would be devastating for us to start all over again.
So clearly you wouldn't have the resources available to continue this work for your education, to take care of your seniors and to develop this housing for your housing needs.
Absolutely not. This would really set us back probably 2 decades at this point if we had to start all over again.
And finally, as part of the land exchange legislation in 2014, the town of Superior was authorized to purchase some parcels of land. How would the inability to purchase those lands impact Superior?
Quite frankly, we will not be able to grow or expand. We are already in a pinch for needing affordable housing and additional business opportunity. Without this land, Superior will be held in a holding pattern, probably indefinitely.
Okay. Thank you so much for your testimony today. Madam Chair, I would yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. The chair will now recognize Representative Lowenthal for 5 minutes. It appears Mr. Lowenthal is not with us right now, so the chair will now recognize Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, and of course to all of the witnesses that we have heard from. Last year, I met with a young girl named Vanessa from the San Carlos Apache tribe. She talked about the importance of Oak Flats and what this sacred site means in a young woman's coming of age ceremony. And now Oak Flat, a sacred site to many tribal nations for the past 1,500 years, is at risk of being destroyed for a mining operation. It may not be our religion, but to Vanessa's family, the death of the lands is the death of their daughter, who will be unable to become one with the earth. Plain and simple, this is a violation of the sanctity of ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples. You destroy it, and it's gone forever. A question for President Lewis. Thank you for your testimony and for joining us today. You stated in your testimony that moving forward with this project would also leave a stain on who we are as Americans, since we would be exchanging the religious freedoms of tribal people for a promise of jobs and profit offered by foreign mining interests. Can you talk about the precedent of exchanging a known traditional cultural property to foreign mining companies who will destroy it, that this would establish here in our country?
Thank you for the question, Representative Garcia. Again, looking at the impact that this would have on tribes as setting a precedent would be the impact of destroying of a sacred site. As we know, and I think you made your statement earlier that the destruction of a sacred site is irreplaceable. And to tribes, I think I agree with you. The importance of that may be more important to the tribe than people that aren't familiar. But the destruction of a sacred site and the irreplaceable act of doing that is what's probably the most important thing to tribes.
Thank you, President Lewis. You mentioned the destruction of 46,000-year-old indigenous rock shelters in Australia. What's been Rio Tinto's response to that devastation of Juukan Gorge, and how does this parallel Oak Flat?
Not to be totally familiar of how that exchange went, but the irreplaceable sacred site is, I think, what's most important. And to think that you could replace a sacred site with like jobs or money, that's not acceptable to to tribal nations.
Thank you, sir. So in closing, I just ask my colleagues, if Oak Flat were a Christian holy site, would we be even having this discussion? As we consider the harmful impacts of bulldozing through and desecrating sacred sites, let us not forget that this is ultimately about profits. The poorly vetted proposal from Resolution Copper, a joint venture run by foreign mining companies, will come at a great cost to the communities closest hit, all of which was done with little consultation with tribes, and all of which is happening because of the midnight rider that's giving our public lands, the sacred lands of tribes, to a corporation. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. The chair will now recognize Mr. Benz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank everyone for their most interesting testimony. A couple of remarks about the need for copper. The first, perhaps people should be reminded that a current automobile, conventional car, uses between 18 pounds and 49 pounds of copper. A hybrid vehicle, about 85 pounds of copper. A plug-in vehicle, about 132 pounds of copper. And a battery electric vehicle, about 183 pounds of copper. And so as we look into our future, which I think is going to be electric, we need 4 times as much copper for each car. This is nothing to be argued over, it's just the facts. And we also recently became aware, because of the COVID challenge, of the fragility of our supply chains when we're trying to import this precious metal from other countries. And the incredible risk we face if we rely upon countries that don't share our interests in protecting our indigenous peoples. Why would we want to put our fate in their hands? I place this situation before President Sharp, because I'm now going to ask her a question about how we balance, given the existential challenge that we face with these climate issues. How are we going to meet these challenges and balance against them the important religious issues we have now been hearing about? Would you please address that? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I appreciate that question. The first point that I would make is, and it goes back to my remark earlier, that the ability for a tribal nation to exercise its religious freedom is something that was gifted to us by our Almighty Creator. I mean, these are things that are absolutely central to our identity, central to our spiritual health, and the cost that a question of balancing interest, it's unconscionable to think that we're even having that question. When I hear the mayor talk about all the toll that the potential of not passing this bill would wreak on her community, that's a direct result of the failure of the United States to honor the basic human and civil rights of Indigenous peoples to begin with. So that is one price that will be paid. There's another price for desecrating the spiritual health and well-being of the San Carlos Apache, for which there's no way to bring that back. There's no way to fund that. There's no way to in any way monetize that. And so to even begin to analyze the question of balancing, I can't even let my mind go to that place, because this is something that is so central to who we are and the precedent that this would create, not only at San Carlos Apache, but all across Indian country. If we can monetize our spiritual health, if we can monetize that which the Creator gifted to us, if we can monetize our very identity, clearly that would create a path where all Indigenous peoples risk even surviving another generation. So I can't even get to that place.
Thank you, President Sharp. And a question for Dr. Wells. I just want to put in perspective the 13,000 acre feet of water this project would use each year. Those are my numbers. My understanding is that under the Colorado River Compact, Arizona's to end up with 2.8 million acre feet of water a year. And I know that could go down. But to put that in perspective, this project would use 13,000 acre feet the Colorado project allocates 2.8 million acre feet to Arizona. I just want to call that out and suggest that the hypotheticals that we're using, trying to show how much 13,000 acre feet is interesting, but it needs to be played both directions. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Benz. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I really understand the delicate needs that we are, trying to grapple with this hearing. The need for copper and a certain level of independence. But I'm struck by two comments. One is, once it is gone forever, as we heard from President Lewis. And I'm thinking about the comment that we heard at our last subcommittee hearing, where we are encouraged to use Indigenous women, wisdom from a wonderful Hawaiian woman, and that is the need to protect our planet while we move forward on developing our future. And that it's really important that we learn the lesson of placing long-term protections above short-term prospects. And I think some of those concerns were reflected in several letters that we received, including from the San Carlos Apache tribe, the Navajo Nation, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, outlining their concerns with the transfer of Oak Flat. And I ask unanimous consent to submit these to the record. I want to begin with this concern about water. And Dr. Wells, your testimony about a 450-foot drop in the water table is quite alarming. As somebody who once had a domestic well and helped others build and wells for their smaller communities, this is quite alarming. So I would like to ask you about the Trump administration's rush to complete the FEIS and publish it just 5 days before the end of their administration. Now, the Biden administration rescinded the FEIS, but can you explain some of the most significant deficiencies of the FEIS as it relates to water resources?
Yes, Chairwoman, thank you for that question. I believe that the biggest deficiency in the EIS process with respect to water resources was taking a hard look, as NEPA requires, of the cumulative impacts on groundwater resources in Arizona and in particular the East Salt River Valley. Another thing I'll point out is that after the draft EIS was published, there were major new studies that were completed and incorporated into the final EIS without public input and the opportunity for public comment. And that included some really fundamental things like water quality impacts at Skunk Camp, which is where the tailings dump would be. And none of this was subject to public review and comment because the final was rushed to publication.
Thank you. And Mayor Besich, I share so many of your concerns about creating economic opportunities in our rural communities. I think that's basically a big job and task of us as public servants. But I'm also concerned about the way in which the proposed mine may hinder other economic opportunities. I would like, and I will be pursuing, I can assure you, the need to invest in those communities like yours, which may have relied on mining or fossil fuel in the past, and the importance of creating the infrastructure that we need, rather than perhaps depending on foreign companies to help keep our kids in school. I will pursue making sure that we have adequate funding for education, which is what we're trying to do with the new infrastructure bill. Dr. Wells, though, I want to ask you a quick question about use in your testimony. There was acid rock drainage What is acid rock drainage and how might that impact like recreational opportunities in an area?
I have an hour-long lecture on that.
You know what? I only have 20 seconds left.
Okay.
Maybe you can cite your lecture.
The mining waste includes sulfide minerals like pyrite. When that's exposed to air and water, it oxidizes, it rusts, it releases sulfuric acid. That in turn leaches toxic metals out of the rock, and that gets into our surface and groundwater, and it's really about the most significant environmental impact worldwide from mining.
Thank you very much for completing that so quickly. The chair. Is he with us? In that case, the chair will, I understood that Congressman Westerman had indeed joined us.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry I didn't hear you. I think your microphone muted early, but I didn't hear you call on me. Sorry about that.
Well, it is nice to have you with you. The chair now recognizes you, Congressman Westerman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been hearing a lot of talk about a rushed process, but looking at the data, this process has taken 20 years with 130,000 submitted comments, 35,000 submitted comments for the draft EIS, and there are only 13 objections during the period for the final EIS, and only one was from an Indian tribe, which was a San Carlos Apache tribe. Mayor Besich, do you think it's necessary for the Forest Service to throw away 20 years of work and a nearly 3,000-page environmental impact statement and, quote, start over as some other witnesses are calling for?
No, it is not necessary. Their work has been adequate and complete, and it would be devastating for Superior and the surrounding area for this process to start over.
Thank you, Mayor. Dr. Wells, you testified extensively to the impacts on water from this mine. If the FEIS discloses that adequate groundwater exists for committed regional demands, including Resolution Copper's needs over the next 100 years, further Resolution Copper has proactively stored more than 50% of predicted water needs from renewable sources. The EIS impact statement discloses the effects of withdrawing those renewable sources and additional water needs along with current and future water users. This was based on assessments by third-party water experts with input from federal and state agencies. Can you explain why your view is so vastly different from so many water experts and federal and state agencies?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. I served on the Tonto National Forest groundwater working group for the draft and final EIS, and I can tell you that there are a number of hydrology experts that express the same concerns that I have. There is not enough water in the East Salt River Valley for all the competing uses. With regard to the groundwater that Resolution has banked, and that is correct, they have banked a lot of water from the Central Arizona project. Through kind of a fluke of Arizona law, it's not even stored in the same place where Resolution will be pumping their water from. So in that area where Resolution will be pumping from, it's an area called the Desert Well Field, there will be quite substantial impacts due to that pumping.
Thank you, sir. And Madam Chair, I can't see the timer, but I'll go into the next questions here and just cut me off if I go past. But Resolution Copper is in the Copper Triangle, where there are many operations between the proposed site and the San Carlos Apache Reservation. I understand that there are at least 11 tribes that have taken part in the consultation process. The majority of them are actively participating in the NEPA process in consultation with the U.S. Forest Service. Ms. Sharp, what is San Carlos's position more broadly with active mining? I understand that there's active mining immediately adjacent to the reservation, that water from the reservation is provided for use in those operations.
Yes, thank you for the question, Congressman. I couldn't speak directly to their position on other mining interests, but I can speak in general to the San Carlos Apache position with respect to tribal consultation and the ability for them to voice their concerns, raise issues in a consultation process. And I think what we're witnessing in what you described as the 20 years of well-documented work, that is again a direct result of the failure to consult at the front end, and we're paying for the price. So it is necessary to re-engage and honor the relationship that the United States has with the tribal nations going forward if we're going to continue to work through this issue in a way that ensures the trust responsibility is upheld.
And my understanding is that the Apache Leap, which is of religious significance, and additional acreage was given a special management area designation. Will these areas be affected by the subsidence that may occur over the life of the project?
What I can, from just my personal perspective and what I recall from when the original legislation was passed in the NDAA, I recall a press release that accompanied it, and it assured the San Carlos Apache people they would be able to exercise their religion and their spiritual health and well-being in these places. But what caught my attention was there was a provision that said, so long as it's safe. And so that told me that in 2015, there was an idea that at some point in the future, it was not going to be safe for the San Carlos Apache people. And it was a springing expectation at some point in the future. So I would say that if there isn't an entire ability for religious freedom, it's not religious freedom.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Sharp. And yes, we have gone over about a minute, so we will now move, and the chair will recognize Congressman Stover, if he is here. Congressman Stover.
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'd just like to make a few comments. I'd like to make a comment about the bill history itself regarding the Oak Flat Land Exchange. The Southeast Arizona Land Exchange and Conservation Act was debated for nearly a decade in Congress before it was enacted. The exchange was part of a 56-bill bipartisan compromise package that was included in the FY 215 NDAA, and not a lone midnight rider that some allege. And thank you, Chairman Gallego and Ranking Member Young, for allowing me to join today to discuss a mining project seeking to extract the critical minerals needed for renewable energy, national security, and everyday life. It undergoes a rigorous review process for decades, receives hundreds of thousands of comments, makes adjustments, puts a plan together, and moves forward. The company signs a project labor agreement with the local building trades union, committing to high-wage union labor. Democrats then take the presidency and Congress, ignore pledges made to domestically sourced critical minerals and hire union labor, and then attempt to undermine workers and local officials to appease activist groups with armies of lawyers and deep pockets. No, I'm not talking about mining in my great state of northern Minnesota. Today, we're talking about Resolution Copper. Mayor Besich, the Iron Range mayors in my district in northern Minnesota want mining in northern Minnesota because they are proud of their resources and they want the investment in our communities and schools just like you. Could you discuss what it means to have 1,500 direct jobs in a small town like yours that have high quality, family sustaining wages?
Representative, thank you very much for your question, and I applaud the efforts of your Iron Range mayors in Minnesota. I've actually followed some of the techniques that they've used to ensure that the extraction industry funds important and critical things like infrastructure, education, and economic development, because I think we all understand that we're proud of our extraction-based industry, but we also know we have to diversify. Having these types of jobs in our community will give us a new opportunity to sustain our community for additional generations. As I stated in my testimony, my children are the 5th generation of our family. They have the opportunity to grow up here and consider mining as the opportunity, or to be entrepreneurs or support other tech-based jobs that we are trying to attract here in our community, because we are thinking outside of the box and oftentimes following our predecessors in northern states that are making policies that are good for mining communities.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Mayor. And so to close, I'd like to share 2 quotes. First, from the Boilermakers Local 627 President Jacob Evenson about the Biden administration's FEIS reversal. The USDA's decision means our members, most of which are Navajo and Apache tribal members, will continue to hope and wait for the day when they can clothe their families, feed their parents, and put shoes on little feet. And then the second, from the Arizona Building and Construction Trades Council President Aaron Butler, regarding the companion bill to HR 1884. Quote, on behalf of Arizona's workers and families, I ask that you not support Senate 915, a short-sighted bill that will do long-term harm to Arizona's skilled workforce and economy. And so in closing, I'd like to enter the following letters into the record. The first is the commitments made by Resolution Copper to the community in the EIS, and also the consultation record in the EIS for Resolution Copper, which is close to 70 pages. And then lastly, the union support letters. Support letters from the Arizona Building and Construction Trades Council, UA Local 469 Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Union, United Steelworkers Union, Boilermakers Local 627, tribal support letters thanking the Forest Service for their consultation process, San Carlos Apache tribal member Cody Eljo, Jerome Casey, the vice chairman of the White Mountain Apache tribe, John Huey, chairman of the Havasupai Apache Nation, local business and stakeholder support letters, Arizona Chamber of Commerce, Greater Phoenix Economic Council, Greater Phoenix Leadership, Valley Partnership, Superior County Chamber of Commerce, Copper Corridor Economic Development Coalition, Southern Arizona Business Coalition, Laura Scare, Women's Mining Coalition, Audaneta Construction, Queen Creek Coalition, Resolution Copper, and then the state and local support letters, Governor Ducey of Arizona, State Senator Shope of Arizona District 8, Pinal County District Leaders, Gila County District Leaders, Towns of Superior, Kearney, Miami, Winkleman, and Hayden, City of Apache Junction, Greater Phoenix Leadership, Eastern Arizona Counties Organization, and the Community Working Group. These are going to be, Madam Chair, I request to unanimous consent to have these in the record. And to Mayor Besich, I will just tell you that stay in the fight. We need these critical minerals. They're a part of our strategic national security, and we are blessed to have these minerals in our earth in this great country. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Yeah, without objections, so ordered. The chair will now recognize for 5 minutes Representative Soto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to express my appreciation to both you and to the committee on working on the Oak Flats issue. It's something I was proud to co-sponsor. Just this past week, I read an amazing article in the Washington Post talking about the rites of passage for young women coming of age through the Oak Flats ceremonies. There's clearly a long history of long ceremonial history for this sacred land. We're seeing whether it was in bear's ears with the destruction that comes about when we don't protect these sacred lands, to now with Oak Flats and others, that we need to continue to play an active role. And so I wanted to make sure to just express my support here today. And if there is any other questions that you, Madam Chair, wanted to ask, I would defer some time to you to give you more time to be able to do that, since I just got into the meeting just about 5 minutes ago.
Thank you very much, Representative Soto. I think I'm fine, but I do appreciate the offer.
In that case, I support your efforts and I yield back.
Thank you. So with this concludes the time that we have set aside for the members to ask their questions. I truly want to thank the members. There was great conversation today about the competing interests, and I express my deep appreciation to our expert witnesses for their insightful answers to those questions as well as their testimony. As I stated before, the members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I don't have a question for the witnesses, but I'd like to redirect a misstatement that was made about how this piece of the legislation came to be in a conference committee report. Do I submit that to the staff?
Yes, please submit that, and we will make that part of the record so that it can respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So if there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.